Sorry, I keep pushing this. Apparently, I have to move my cursor. So now I'm going to have 3 uploads. I'm sorry, I keep touching the keyboard. I'm getting just so excited about the material. Let's see. McClung, who was one of these women, announced she was going to be married. We've seen this, that women at the time pretty much had to get married. It was her role in life. The announcement, however, shattered Cather physically and mentally. She reported that she was unable to start a new book because of the death of Judge McClung and Isabel's marriage. It impacted her enormously. Cather picked herself up, however, and that summer she went to New Mexico with Edith Lewis, another one of these important characters. Cather's relationship with Edith Lewis was a far different affair from her friendship with McClung. It began as an ordinary acquaintance when Cather met Lewis in Lincoln in the summer of 1903. Lewis had come home after graduating from Eastern College, and Cather was visiting friends in Nebraska. The relationship grew steadily the longer they were colleagues and neighbors. It took a more serious turn in 1908 when Cather and Lewis decided to share an apartment in New York. And from this beginning grew a lifetime companionship. Cather and Lewis lived together until Cather died in 1947. By all accounts, this relationship between Cather and Lewis was really a highly developed domestic relationship, so that Lewis managed the domesticity of their living, and whereas McClung, she could talk to McClung about writing, whereas with Edith Lewis, it was sort of a maintenance of one's own life. Then the third woman is Elizabeth Sargent. Sargent also wrote a memoir of Cather, and because she outlived her friend, Cather's letters to her have survived. Whereas neither McClung nor Lewis was a writer, Sargent had made her living as a journalist and author. Okay. McClung, Lewis, and Sargent do not exhaust the list of Cather's close women friends. Those are the 3 prominent ones. There are at least 5 more important relationships that extended over many years. Elements of them appear in the fiction, appear in the creative works of Cather in the women characters, but suffice it to say that there is enough speculation about Cather and her, whether or not she was a lesbian, that I thought it was worth bringing to your attention. As I said, he concludes there is no conclusion. And so we really need to be focused on the artist that she strived to become. Okay, so let's see. This novel, these are my instructions on how to get things onto YouTube. So as I said, there's going to be 3 videos as long as I don't touch the keyboard again. This introduction to Song of the Lark, this is a Penguin edition, and it begins. The Song of the Lark is a constellar roman, the story of an artist's growth and development from childhood to maturity. More particularly, and decidedly more rarely, it is a female constellar roman, one in which the male characters are satellites and willing servants to a woman's career. That's exactly what we see. But that's why it was so important to tell you about these 3 women friendships that she has, because it's important to her as a developing artist that she achieves these frozen heights. Thea Kronberg is a Scandinavian-American singer who works her way up from the dusty desert town of Moonstone, Colorado, to the boards of the Metropolitan Opera House. Although Willa Cather herself was not a musician, she neither sang nor played a musical instrument. The portions of the novel covering childhood, apprenticeship, and artistic awakening in the Western landscape are frankly autobiographical. Its final section, dealing with Thea's professional life, is drawn largely from the career of the Wagnerian soprano Olive Fremstad, who I've mentioned, and who was the kind of artist Willa Cather still aspired to be. For although Cather was 42 when The Song of the Lark was published in 1915, it was only the third of her 12 novels, and thus belonged to the early stage of her distinguished career. A small note about the title. The Song of the Lark is taken from this painting, which is a young peasant woman admiring the song of the lark. She's clearly out in the fields and the pastures, and you can see that she's barefoot. I know that you have seen this painting before, but that's where she drew the title from. The child was deeply affected by being plucked from the lush Appalachian hills and hurled out into a country as flat and as bare as a piece of sheet iron. That's what Cather said. The sameness and instability of the prairie landscape, an endless sea of churning grasses without firm contours of familiar landscapes, threatened her with a kind of erasure of personality. And this is a description from Cather. That's what she feared. It was a sense of drowning or going under. She conquered her fear by learning to read botanical and other fine dictions in the terrain. She said that the prairie's overwhelming scale afflicted her with an unsettling combination of homesickness and agoraphobia. Willa was the oldest. I already told you that. Yeah, I told you that too. Even in adolescence, Cather was unintimidated by convention and counsel. Among her friends, adults considered unusual or eccentric in the bustling frontier town. People considered her to be unusual and eccentric as well. Oops, I can't lose that. At first, however, Cather planned to become a doctor. I thought that was interesting as well. Not an artist. In her early teens, she apprenticed herself to the town's physician, with whom she rode about the countryside, assisting with house calls and prairie dugouts. In these years, she assigned herself the name William Cather, M.D., cropped her hair, and wore men's clothing, a practice she continued through her first year at the University of Nebraska, which she entered at the age of 16. So she's a little bit out there, a little bit odd, but, artists are, I guess. At the end of that first year, Cather was surprised by the publication of a piece in the Nebraska State Journal. And from then on, she was smitten with the idea of becoming a writer. She said, and repeatedly she says this, the wife of an artist, Cather maintained, must always be a secondary consideration with him. She should realize that from the outset, because art of every kind is an exacting master, more so even than Jehovah. So she didn't really believe that marriage was a possibility for her, and yet she did develop these women friendships. This Wagnerian operas would affect her artistic taste very strongly. She said when Wagner called his goddess woman Down out of Walhalla, she wrote in her review, they relegated the fragile heroines of the old Italian opera to oblivion. If audiences had lost patience, even with Mozart, it was all because of that malicious man Wagner had so stung the palate that other styles seemed insipid. So it might be worth our while maybe to listen to a couple of Wagnerian operas. We have to do that on our own time, though. Let's see. Cather was ambitious and had long contended that the demands of an intimate relationship were a hindrance to a serious artist. I let's see. She also consorted and she went. This is this trip that she made to visit her brother in Winslow, Arizona. Again, you can see her riding around on horseback, visiting some of the local natives. She also consorted and danced with the local Mexicans, whose beauty and musicality delighted her. She was particularly infatuated with the young fellow named Julio, who serenaded her at night and took her to see the Painted Desert. She essentially then returned to New York refreshed. Okay. I already showed you about the title. The painting, by the way, is by Jules Breton, Breten. It demonstrates in this painting the connection between landscape and her memory and the musician she wants to become. That's Thea. But you can see how profoundly autobiographical the development of artist is in her. So let's see. Here's another reference to the frozen heights of perfection. And when Cather saw Olive Fremsted sing, she became really electrified by her performance. As an artist, both equipped and determined to reach the frozen heights, Fremsted had only one great passion, her art. And you can see Cather developing this concept in the character Thea. Cather herself had protested to the puzzled Elizabeth Sargent that while most artists almost desperately link themselves to lovers, spouses, and children as if to avoid being... I think I read you that part. Yeah, I already did. I saw that. The great intellectual excitement that Cather experienced now would be to consummate this attraction, to merge Fremsted and herself in the character of Thea Kronberg, the opera singer heroine of The Song of the Lark, as if to merge herself with this Wagnerian opera singer. Thea, like Olive Fremsted, comes from I have that's his autobiography. It comes from Swedish Norwegian stock and is the musical daughter of a Methodist minister, obliged to give lessons and play and sing at prayer meetings and revivals. We see that in the early character of Thea. Most of the other details of her youth, however, are drawn directly from Willa Cather's own experience. Like Cather, Thea is one of 7 children growing up in an overcrowded little house in Moonstone. So I had 2 references to Cather and her siblings. In one place it says she's one of 7. In another place it says she's one of 4. I never really got the final story on that. I think that probably when she started writing, there were 4, and then, of course, more kids came along. Her parents recognized and respected her daughter's unusual gifts, but her more conventional siblings and neighbors think of Taya as spoiled, rebellious, and stuck up. That's just like her relationship with her own people. Her refuge is a tiny room in the high-windowed gabled end of the attic, a rose-papered bower where she can read, write, and dream in peace. Okay. Many readers have been puzzled by Cather's taste for Wagner, whom Henry James once called a ridiculous mixture of nihilism and bric-a-brac. I don't know Wagnerian opera. I don't know it well at all. So I thought that was an interesting observation by Henry James. The composer's crude anti-Semitism and intellectuality and morally muddled exhibitionism had compromised his reputation well before he was championed by the Third Reich. Yet Wagner understood better than any composer before or after him the emotional and intellectual potential of opera and his impact on the Western intellectual life, filtered partly through the interdisciplinary symbolist movement, which adopted him as its patron saint. Again, there's another reference to her passion for her art, which becomes exclusive and does not allow for an emotional attachment to another person. Many critics have commented on Cather's tendency to circumvent love stories or to punish erotic relationships between her fictional characters. In most of her novels, someone is either humiliated or destroyed by love gone wrong. While this is usually discussed autobiographically, as a sign of Cather's own sexual repressions or neuroses. Now, remember that one critic said, you can't find any of the any definitive point about her sexuality. It is Wagner, not Freud, who provides the most useful model for her artistic approach to eroticism. To Cather, dedicated like Wagner to the priesthood of art, these dangers are potent and real, and they were epitomized in Klinger's Slave Kundry, the role that made Olive Fremstad famous. While this seems perhaps like a digression, I think it's very important to understand her passion for her art. In many ways, this is reminiscent of Portrait of an Artist, who he did the same kind of thing in his pieces, in each of the chapters in Portrait of an Artist. Cather was pleased with the manuscript of Song of the Lark. She sent it off in March 1915. The editor at Houghton Mifflin, but to her consternation, Greenslet, the editor, wanted changes. The early parts he felt were too long. There were too many predictable details about Taya's student years in Germany and about Dr. Archie's politics. Dr. Archie is modeled after the physician that she apprenticed herself to when she was young. And the book seemed to have a split personality. It's interesting. While the first parts were scrupulously realistic, the last sections were highly romanticized. Cather's feathers were ruffled. She didn't care for that. Whenever I teach creative writing, my students get all in a tither every time I make any kind of reference that needs to be corrected or changed or updated or something. They just think that they're the artist as Cather. But none of them are really too inclined to accept any kind of criticism, like Cather. She had been a rigorous student of the singer's career, after all, attending, and this is about Taya in the book, attending lessons, rehearsals, performances, consulting with voice teachers, critics, and performers about technical details. She knew what she was doing. She agreed to the cuts about Germany and Dr. Archie, but put her foot down about the rest. Greenslet didn't press further, and the book was issued in October of that year. Critical response was mostly enthusiastic, especially important to Cather. Fremsted praised it, particularly the early chapters about childhood and Panther Canyon. The last sections, too, were treated seriously, making it the only novel Fremsted had read about an artist in which there was something doing in the character. So Fremsted liked the characterization. The influential H.L. Mencken declared that The Song of the Lark placed Cather in the small class of American novelists who were seriously to be reckoned with. That's high praise, especially from H.L. Mencken. The public clearly admired the novel's strength as it went through 19 reprintings, more than one per year, between 1915 and 1936. For a long time, Cather felt so personally entangled with her double portrait heroine that she could not accept any criticism, and when she eventually did understand them, she seems to have been embarrassed. In 1932, she reprinted The Song of the Lark with her own preface, and many of the Greenslet's criticisms she took to heart. Knowing Fremsted had only helped make her aware of the routine of a singer's life, she protested. Oh, jeez.